The House of Windsor has entered a period of clinical stillness, defined by an ultimatum that leaves no room for ambiguity. While King Charles manages state interests across the Atlantic, the Prince of Wales has demarcated a boundary that appears permanent. This is the protector complex. It is the cold realization that personal grievances must be sacrificed to ensure the survival of the crown. At RAF Valley, the atmosphere mirrors the prince's internal shift. Amidst the precision of military aviation, William projects the image of a sovereign already in waiting. The role of Royal Honorary Air Commodore demands the total suppression of the individual. In this rigid hierarchy, there is no resonance for the sentiments once expressed by the Duke of Sussex. Where Harry spoke of the monarchy as a trap that consumed their mother, William sees it as a fortress of order. The institutional shell has hardened. The king's response arrived from thousands of miles away, delivered through a digital pulse, a symbolic gesture on a screen. In the diplomatic lexicon of the contemporary court, this was a calculated attempt at continuity, a silent plea for peace. But affection holds little mass against the gravity of an existential threat. William's ultimatum is absolute. The crown cannot be shared with those who find its weight unbearable. Duty has become a siege. April 2026 marked the definitive bifurcation of the House of Windsor. A British sovereign arrived on American soil for a high-stakes state visit, the first in nearly 2 decades. This was a grand reclamation of institutional relevance. Beneath the dome of the Capitol, King Charles III addressed a joint session of Congress. He sought to project a united kingdom of unwavering stability, anchoring the Atlantic Alliance in the weight of history. But 10,000 miles away, in Melbourne, a different narrative was being constructed. The Inner Edge Summit provided the stage for the Melbourne dissonance. The monarchy found itself operating in 2 distinct competing realities. In Washington, the king embodied the endurance of thousand-year-old traditions. In Australia, the Duke of Sussex engaged in a public deconstruction of those very foundations. The sanctity of the office was now in direct confrontation with the autonomy of the individual. The 2 courts were no longer a theoretical rift. They had become a geopolitical fact. By April 28th, the divergence was absolute. As the king spoke of shared democratic values, the echo from Melbourne challenged the moral validity of the legacy he represented. This was not a family dispute. It was a structural failure of the monarchical consensus. The institution was being pulled apart by the force of its own contradictions. 2 continents, 2 conflicting doctrines, 1 crown fractured by the pressure of competing truths. The mechanics of the palace operate behind a veil of absolute protocol. When that veil thins, we witness the surgical precision of an institutional defense. The Prince of Wales has moved beyond personal grievance into the cold logic of constitutional preservation. This is the rejection of sentimentality in favor of structural integrity. To William, reconciliation is not a private mercy. It is a systemic vulnerability. He has identified the dissonance from the Australian coast not as a family rift, but as a pathogen to the monarchical consensus. The king's response from Washington was a masterclass in modern statecraft. By endorsing the heir's vision through the clinical channels of digital diplomacy, the monarch ratified a new internal order. It was the modern equivalent of the Great Seal. This alignment signifies a terminal shift in the Windsor strategy. The king has prioritized the office over the impulse of the parent. In the architecture of the crown, the individual is always the first sacrifice. The divergence witnessed in April is no longer a crisis to be managed. It is a reality to be enforced. Continuity is the only law that remains. House of Windsor has stabilized its orbit, leaving those outside the perimeter to fade into historical irrelevance. The crown is a singular weight, It does not permit the luxury of a divided house. History within the House of Windsor is not a linear progression. It is a series of recursive cycles. The current friction mirrors deep structural tremors that have previously threatened the foundation of the state. In 1737, the political landscape was fractured by the Leicester House faction. Frederick, Prince of Wales, established a shadow court to challenge the authority of George II. It was a calculated schism that transformed the royal household into a theater of ideological warfare. Today we observe a sophisticated inversion of this historical precedent. The Prince of Wales does not seek to diminish the king's sovereignty. He seeks to insulate it. William is acting as the architect of a new containment policy. He is overriding the king's paternal inclinations to ensure the office remains untainted by the dissonance emerging from across the Atlantic. The most formidable parallel remains the crisis of 1937. Following the abdication, George VI and Queen Elizabeth recognized that the institution could not survive a competing royal narrative. They enforced a total diplomatic embargo against the Duke of Windsor. The monarchy is a singular entity. It cannot tolerate a rival court. William's ultimatum is the modern ratification of this 1937 doctrine. By demanding a definitive choice between reconciliation and institutional integrity, he is honoring the grim logic of his ancestors. The system prioritizes continuity over the individual. It is a sterile, necessary exclusion. The crown has no room for those who view its service as a burden to be escaped. The geography of power has undergone a tectonic recalibration. At RAF Valley, the Prince of Wales did not merely visit a station. He occupied a vacuum. By conferring namesake awards upon elite flight instructors, William reinforced the crown's deepest alignment, the symbiosis between the sovereign and the armed forces. It was a projection of clinical stability. The Windsor brand has reached a state of functional bifurcation. One center of gravity remains anchored in the military hierarchy and Atlantic diplomacy. Here, the heir serves as the absolute guarantor of the old order. The second orbit, shifting across the Pacific, is defined by the public deconstruction of the institutional self. This is the emergence of a bipolar monarchy. The king's endorsement of the Welsh engagement functions as a formal ratification of this containment policy. By favoring the stoic officer over the aggrieved relative, the sovereign has signaled a terminal shift in the royal defense posture. Legitimacy is now consolidated strictly within the perimeter. The institution is no longer a monolith. It is a structure with two centers of gravity drifting apart until the connection becomes purely vestigial. The Atlantic remains the fortress of the crown. The division is no longer a matter of sentiment. It is an act of geopolitical survival. King Charles III now inhabits the legacy trap. It is a terminal psychological space where paternal instinct meets the immovable mandate of the sovereign. To grant mercy is to invite instability. The king understands the cold arithmetic of statecraft. A private peace requires a public fracture. We are witnessing a silent metamorphosis of British constitutional logic. For the first time in the modern era, the heir apparent has secured an informal, yet absolute, veto over the monarch's diplomatic reach. The Prince of Wales is the active director of the crown's defensive posture. The scepter remains in Washington, but the center of gravity has moved to the perimeter. The institution has transitioned from an aspirational symbol of family into a mechanism of surgical exclusion. It prioritizes the structural integrity of the office over the emotional requirements of its occupants. The crown does not seek to bridge every gap. It merely seeks to survive the descent. History records not the warmth of intentions, but the weight of irrevocable decisions. The institution preserves itself by shedding what it can no longer govern, ensuring the throne remains the only constant in an age of fragmentation. As the House of Windsor recalibrates its orbit, the true nature of power remains veiled. Join our circle for continued analysis of the monarchy's evolving strategy.